Namaste and welcome to the Global Order. I'm your host, Swarina Singh. Today's conversation is part of the Global Order's initiative to give its viewers a distinct Indian perspective on international relations and geopolitics. Our guest today is among India's most distinguished experts on China, Dr. Sriparna Pathak. She is a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies. As an author, she published her most recent book titled Strategic Evolution of Quad from Ocean Froth to Asian NATO. Apart from several significant academic collaborations across universities, she has also been a consultant with the Ministry of External Affairs, where she worked on China's domestic and foreign policies. She has been a recipient of the Joint Fellowship awarded by the Ministry of Human Resources Development in India and the China Scholarship Council under the government of the People's Republic of China. Additionally, she spent 2 years in China actively researching various aspects of the country's domestic economy and mastering Mandarin, which, by the way, happens to be one of the 7 languages she is fluent in. On this note, I would like to welcome you, Dr. Pathak. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Swarina. It's always wonderful to speak with you and engage with such brilliant questions and interventions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Professor. I'll dive right into it with one of the most pressing concerns that I could think of. About an estimated 80% of China's crude oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca. It's a passage located to the southeast of the Indian mainland. India's geographic proximity is often cited as an asymmetric advantage. However, in an actual conflict scenario, can India really leverage this advantage, or is it an overstatement? Given the fact that China is working around the Malacca dilemma to diversify its supply chain routes, especially through projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you, Swarina. I think it's a brilliant question to start this discussion with. India's central position in the Indian Ocean, astride critical sea lanes, provides it with natural oversight of maritime traffic, enabling effective monitoring and rapid response capabilities, which enhance regional stability. Now, the Indian Navy maintains one of the most active fleets in the Indian Ocean, conducting persistent deployments and humanitarian missions, which underscore its role as a net security provider for littoral states. Through partnerships like the Quad, India collaborates with like-minded democracies to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific, countering coercive strategies and safeguarding vital sea trade routes. Now, India's naval modernization has also increased tremendously over the last few years, and it now includes advanced submarines, long-range maritime patrol aircraft, island-based infrastructure, and these are just a few to name. All of these strengthen India's ability to project power and to deter disruptions in key choke points. The recent Great Nicobar project, which involves a major transshipment port, a dual usage airport, and supporting infrastructure, is just 150 kilometers from the Malacca Strait. And that significantly boosts India's maritime logistics, trade hub potentials, and forward military presence in the region. While China has been pursuing alternatives via the Belt and Road Initiative, these overland routes like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and pipelines, they handle only a fraction of its massive seaborne oil imports, leaving the majority still dependent on vulnerable maritime passages where India holds geographic proximity. Now, India's robust economic growth, combined with strategic investments in the Nicobar project, it positions it as an indispensable player capable of leveraging the advantages in any contingency to protect its interests and to support a free and open Indo-Pacific order. So that's where we are. And also BRI projects, to be honest, have been faltering over the last few years, and several countries in the Indo-Pacific region have either renegotiated these BRI projects or have raised alarms and so on. So if one were to really compare, I think India stands out as a more reliable partner, and its position has only been strengthened with the latest Nicobar project.
Thank you for the information on that question. Now, this was about the maritime borders, but then again, we also share a very long land border with China, and that has been disputed for all the history that we can think of, especially since the 1962 war. Beijing has consistently maintained that border disputes should be seen as separate from the overall bilateral relations. However, recently New Delhi's stance has changed, where they say that peace and tranquility at the border are absolutely necessary for normalcy in ties, and rightfully so. From your reading of the historical and contemporary relations as well as situations with regards to border management, does China truly believe that India will buy into this narrative? Or is it simply deploying a strategy to delay resolution while it alters the status quo on the ground? If so, then what is it that we can do, and how should this be perceived by the people?
Right, another very interesting question. But just to begin with a few facts, India and Bhutan are the only two countries with which China has not resolved land boundary disputes. With every other country, including Pakistan or Russia for that matter, they resolved their land boundary disputes. And over and above this, it has a lot of, disputes in the South China Sea, or West Philippine Sea, as I would like to call it. So disputes is like a norm for the PRC, and constantly encroaching on others' sovereign territories, be it on the land, be it in the ocean, be it in the air, seems to be a clear-cut strategy which the PRC has. Now, India has consistently said that peace and tranquility along the LAC, line of actual control, are prerequisites for normal bilateral ties with China. And that demonstrates New Delhi's firm commitment to strategic autonomy, to national sovereignty, and so on. However, China imagines that by constantly trying to bulldoze India with these verbal theatrics about let's keep border disputes away from economic ties and so on, and just constantly propagating it, someday India will buy into it. But what it misses out is India is very particular about its sovereign interests, and a mixing of border or sovereign dynamics with economic dynamics is just not going to happen. The sooner Beijing understands this, the better for it. And my unfortunate reading is that Beijing does not want to resolve the boundary dispute. If you look at all the statements and all the commentaries, everything which comes out from the PRC and the PRC controlled media, they talk about maintenance of the border or maintenance of peace at the border, whereas India constantly talks about a resolution. The difference in semantics holds a lot of importance because Beijing doesn't even say that it wants to resolve it. So I think we are very clear as to what Beijing wants. While India wants to resolve the boundary dispute, Beijing either deters it and says it sometime in the future it will get resolved, as it did say to our defense minister Rajnath Singh last year, or it just says that, let's not mix economics with politics. Despite China's attempts to separate border disputes from overall ties, India has successfully maintained the link, and it has compelled Beijing to engage in multiple rounds of military and diplomatic ties since the 2020 Ladakh standoff. India's robust military modernization and infrastructure development along the northern borders have enhanced India's deterrence capabilities, and India has been able to effectively monitor and respond to any alterations in the status quo on the ground. However, Beijing keeps parroting the narrative. Why? Because it understands India as the world's largest democracy, and creating log jams by constantly keeping the population divided over strategies, because civil society groups and opposition groups do rake up these things during parliamentary sessions, essentially deterring or delaying India's decision-making process. Beijing keeps trying to engage in these sorts of things. Now, by insisting on the restoration of the pre-2020 status quo at the LAC, India has showcased the resolve against unilateral changes, such as China's construction of border villages or infrastructure in disputed areas. Now, India has a principled stance, and that is rooted in historical realities and commitment to a rules-based international order. It's a mature power capable of managing a very complex relationship with China because, fortunately or unfortunately, it's our neighbor. And India continues pushing forth the vision of a stable and multipolar Indo-Pacific, which also includes a stable and peaceful border, or the LAC. It's a long drawn battle. It's, as you said, 1962, but it goes way back beyond time, and China is only increasing its claims. Just to give a quick example, um, Galwan was something which was never on the table. But yes, the incursions did happen even in Galwan. And over the next few years, one can expect that Chinese claims are only going to increase. And they try to increase their claims in multiple domains, in multiple facets, and utilize multiple actors within democracies, including within India. So it's a long drawn strategy, a long drawn game. And I think as we move along, India has been holding its resolve, and that's the best foot forward and has been strengthening itself. So that's where we are. The unfortunate bit is, and I know I'm sounding like a pessimist, is that claims are only going to increase from the PRC, and resolution, I really do not see when the resolution will happen, because one party clearly doesn't want to resolve the boundary dispute.
More than sounding like a pessimist, I believe it's important to be grounded in the reality while trying to maintain a sense of optimism. So it is only wise to not ignore the realities as they are on the ground. With regards to that and the statement that you just made, that we share a very complex relationship with China, and also the fact that it does not want to resolve certain issues that it has with India. In this regard, India's trade deficit with China is estimated at 113.5 billion US dollars. The widening gap is often justified by analysts by citing the shift towards an export of capital goods, intermediate components, and active pharmaceutical ingredients, among others. And rightfully so, I believe, because these fuel India's domestic manufacturing and economic growth. But yeah, in the light of the discussion that we've been having, how does one evaluate this trade off? And when does an economical necessity that India has on China and even vice versa turn into a critical vulnerability for the nation?
Right. See, when the global order, when the international system rather, which emerged after the Second World War, was actively trying to think of why do wars happen? Because, the 80 Years' War, 100 Years' War, World War One, World War Two, all these sorts of things were constantly happening. I think the whole international community, including academics, media, theorists, military personnel, everyone wanted to know what could keep wars at bay. And one of the things which was thought of was that let's create economic linkages between countries, and to facilitate that, the forces of liberalization, privatization, globalization also crept in. So it was assumed that if countries trade, then the impetus to go to wars with each other because of the mutual dependency would reduce. However, that has created an additional problem in the world that we live in largely the 2020s and especially 2026, wherein countries like the PRC actually are leveraging even this realm of economics and trade for pushing their own agendas. And they actively engage in weaponization of trade. Now, coming to the India-China mix, and we've had a trade dispute forever, trade differential forever, and China has a surplus trade with India forever. While it is right that, India does not have that many exportables, or those many goods which China would actually want to import, there are certain critical things about the Indian economy for which the whole world is reliant on it. And I'll give you one example, and that would be, India is the generic drugs platform of the world. When pharmaceuticals, generic drugs, the finished products, have to enter even the most bureaucratic, democratic countries, be it in the US or in the European Union, or elsewhere, or Australia's or Japan's or New Zealand's or wherever, they do not find or they do not face inexplicable delays, which is the case when India's generic drugs, generic pharmaceuticals, exports, when they have to enter the market of the PRC, they face inexplicable delays. So these are generally, what Indian goods face in the PRC or in the market is, of course, lack of equal market access. And there are several sanitary and phytosanitary measures or non-tariff barriers which the PRC uses against Indian goods. Just to give you another example, basmati rice exports. A PRC would choose to buy basmati rice from Pakistan, but it would not buy basmati rice from India. What does that say? If there is a country which produces basmati rice, that is India, you know. But then the general rhetoric which comes from the PRC is that there could be a list of 10 pests in Indian basmati rice exports. Now, the weird thing is that in this list of 10 pests, 6 of those are found in the PRC, not in India. Secondly, if you imagine it climatically, geographically, if Pakistan is producing rice, roughly India would also have the same sort of climate and geography. So, what exactly is it that Pakistan would not have those sorts of pests, but India would have those sorts of pests in basmati rice, right? So here is where politics gets tied with economics, right? And this is basically arm twisting just because China has political disputes with India. And you will find examples from n number of realms in the goods that India wants to export to the PRC. If you run any OSINT, you'll also find complaints from companies such as Wipro and TCS, which do great work elsewhere in the world, but they do face obstacles and hurdles in the PRC. So now, how does the trade tariff or the whole trade get equalized? When Xi Jinping had visited India and he had met Prime Minister Modi, there was also a lot of this rhetoric that the PRC would invest in India. How much of that investment has really come in? At least 12 years have passed by, right? Of course, in those 12 years, we've had also military clashes and so on. So the dispute between India and China is not restricted to the military realm. It's also the realm of economics. And right now, India is the fastest growing major economy. China would want to have a piece of that cake, which is why it would want to export more and more of its goods. However, to what extent can India continue getting, Chinese goods? And when India wants to export, it faces active blockades from the PRC. This whole question about tariffs has been popularized by US President Donald Trump. But even before this became an active discussion, around tariffs, the PRC has always been doing it to India. Tariffs and non-tariff barriers, weaponization of trade, illiberal economics. One may use n number of terms to describe it. PRC also wants to invest in India in those segments which are not okay with India. Now, the host country has to be okay with the investments, but the PRC would want to invest in certain things with which India is not okay with. Wherever India wants the investments, the PRC is not interested in investing. So do you see how politics gets actively intertwined with economics? This exactly is the problem, which is why we have the constant trade dispute. They have constantly come up in our discussions with the PRC, but the PRC simply chooses to ignore, doesn't want to do it. Now, what can India really do? Well, there is the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, there's the production linked initiative scheme, and India has boosted domestic production in critical sectors, reducing vulnerability by substituting billions of dollars in imports while scaling up local manufacturing capabilities. Apple iPhones are now produced in India. Just one example. India's pharmaceutical sector, which is a global leader, exports 50% of its active pharmaceutical ingredients to developed markets like the US and Europe. and it has been leveraging imported intermediates to maintain its own position as the pharmacy of the world. India is trying to reduce APIs coming in from the PRC. There have been budgetary allocations for India to increase its own APIs. You know what the problem is, and this is tying it to the whole discourse about economic liberalization, which came in the 1970s when we were thinking of how to prevent the next war. India, like most other democracies, be it Japan or the US or the Europe, actually believed in a very straightforward and simple way that wars need to be reduced, conflicts have to be reduced. Let's leverage economics. Let's think about comparative advantage. But did the PRC think of it like that? Clearly, no. So, which is why we, along with a lot of our partners and friends, got fooled. But we are actively trying to change it. Policy measures, including quality controls, anti-dumping duties, promotion of domestic alternatives, have curbed non-essential imports from China. And India is expanding its own manufacturing base under the Make in India, and that's strengthening self-reliance. And India has a very principled approach of economic engagement, combined with strategic diversification positions, because it is a resilient power. At one point, it was both the US and the PRC actively engaging in tariffs and non-tariff barriers against India last year. But yeah, we showed our resilience. Temporary trade imbalances do exist, but they are being managed through robust growth, reducing critical vulnerabilities over time in favor of a more self-sufficient economy. And I know I did get into too many dynamics, but economics happens to be my one of my favorite things to discuss when it comes to India-China relations.
Thank you for that, because I think the purpose of such conversations is exactly to leave the viewers informed as well as ourselves. So, like you did mention, that China has an utter disregard of India's bilateral interests. And as the word goes bilateral, that means that there has to be a consideration of both sides. However, there is a disregard from China's end of India's interests, but at the same time, you have shifted our attention to the fact that India then stands up for its own interests and has been doing that. This is, I think, also possible knowing that India is the fastest growing economy in the world, one of the largest democracies with the largest population now. But at the same time, previously you had spoken about China's belief, quote unquote, one mountain cannot have two tigers. This has been an integral part of their philosophy. Within Asia, however, India and China are often perceived as the two clashing giants. In the light of recent events, such as the economic shifts in Sri Lanka, as well as the political changes in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Maldives, China's footprint in the Indian neighborhood has come back into the limelight. You had assessed that this is China's way of tying down India to its neighborhood to keep it distracted from any global aspirations. What then are India's options in this regard? I understand we have discussed a lot of it previously, but I think this is one more thing that I'm curious about. Yeah.
No, it's always a very interesting question, and this is how 21st century geopolitics actually plays out, because we tend to use the very typical lenses of just traditional geopolitics or traditional military conflicts, or any sort of resolution of boundary disputes and so on. But conflict in the 21st century, especially in 2026, it has, I think, surpassed just the military or the political domain, and conflict, while it still exists, it gets activated, or it gets, increased or extended through multiple other domains. Now, the best way to keep an India in check would be to keep it tied down to constantly managing its own boundary disputes, because that's one more reason as to why China does not want to resolve the crisis at the LAC, is because India can either choose to focus on its rising economic prowess, as China did since 1978 onwards. But for that, you need a stable periphery. That's true for any country in the world. You go back in time, you go back in history, be it the US, be it the EU, as big as colonizers as they were, they did have stable, same for China and so on. With two actors, China and a Pakistan supported by China. If that is not enough, keep India tied down to the neighborhood by constantly increasing flames in the neighborhood. And it is just common sense that neighbors do not like other neighbors. How do you leverage these neighbors who do not like a strong, independent, mind your own business sort of neighbor? This is true for, because I constantly keep getting these questions about has India messed up the neighborhood? No, India hasn't messed up the neighborhood. You give me, let's take the two great powers of the current international system, US and China. Do they have excellent neighborhoods? Do they get along? Does the US get along in a very hunky-dory way with Mexico and all its neighbors? It does not. Is it true for the PRC as well? Does it have a fantastically romantic relationship with Japan or with South Korea? Even with North Korea, it has issues. Or with the Taiwan? It doesn't. Same is the case for India. But then other actors do not keep increasing the flames, just the way the PRC does. For any country to be the hegemon of the international system, it has to be first the hegemon in its region. Now, the main challenge for the PRC is the US. Always was the US, is the US, will always be the US. However, how does it ensure that it can challenge the US and aspire for the hegemony or the leadership of the international system? First, it needs the hegemony of the region that it lives in. Unfortunately, we share the region with them, which is Asia. So do everything possible within Asia and ensure that one mountain, which is Asia, cannot have two tigers. Ishan Arhu is what it's called in Chinese. So under the neighborhood first policy, India extended over $14 billion in lines of credit to neighboring countries, including Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, funded more than 160 projects which enhance connectivity, infrastructure, energy cooperation, and has offered concessional transparent alternatives to debt-heavy arrangements. However, this never gets contrasted to the PRC's loans, debt-heavy loans, and entrapping loans, illiberal economics, because the neighbors either do not compare, either have too much of angst against India because of the same neighborhood, and so on. China leverages that. In response to economic crisis, India provided Sri Lanka with nearly $5 billion in critical fuel, in food, in medicine. Now, can Indian taxpayers get back fuel which has been spent by Sri Lankans? No. Can Indian taxpayers, from whose money all this aid goes, get back the food consumed by the Sri Lankans? No. Can we get back the medicines, anti-malaria vaccines, and so on? We cannot, because India gives in sustainable and required things by the distressed country. PRC does not do that. PRC just gives loans, rewrites loans, keeps interest rates in a very shady way. India has its strength. Have we played that up? Probably we have this very this tendency, and this tendency in foreign policy also comes in from our personal cultures. Every country's personal cultures have somehow overflown into their strategic cultures as well. Ours also has. Irrespective of whether we identify first as Bengali or Naga or Assamese or Telugu or Tamil or Gujarati, there is an Indian personal culture which is neki kar darya mein dal. Do not advertise. Do not seek benefits out of the good that you're trying to do, and create sustainable development. That has flown into our strategic culture, which is why, irrespective of all the stability we create in the neighborhood, we do not hype it up. As opposed to a PRC, which only creates distress in our neighborhood, but then showcases it as itself as a very benign actor. Our development assistance to neighbors has reached over 21,100 crore rupees in more recent years. 21,100 crore rupees. That's a humongous amount. Um, the 2026-27 budget increased allocations to Maldives, rupees 550 crores, to Nepal, rupees 800 crores, and has tried to strengthen people-centric projects in health, connectivity, and capacity building, things which actually countries need. Through initiatives like the UPI rollout in Maldives, in Sri Lanka, and Nepal by 2025, alongside cross border power transmission agreements, such as the Inaruwa New Purnia with Nepal, India is deepening digital and energy integration, which actually delivers tangible economic benefits to the region. Do our neighbors see it? That's another story. Despite all shifts in Bangladesh and Nepal, we've maintained high level engagements with infrastructure focus, which has helped consolidate ties with Maldives and Sri Lanka. It's leveraged cultural affinities and so on. India has also tried to share economic growth, strategic diversion through BIMSTEC, through BBIN, through enhanced defense cooperation, so that it can have sustainable partnerships. What do we do here on? Yet things don't seem to be changing. I will just say one thing. Governments see, or security forces, agencies, and the MODs and MEAs and MHAs know and see much more things than what we can understand through OSINT or definitely social media, right? There is only one way. Continue proving the better actor, right? And keep hoping that one day things, your efforts will actually bring in fruits, because the other alternative is much more difficult. China has taken over the Hambantota port, for example, right? Because, and this is unprecedented, it has never happened in history that when you can't pay back loans, your sovereign territories are taken. If we do not keep playing the role of the more trustable partner, things go in a more difficult direction. So India has to keep its guard, and it has to do two more things. The era of Neki Kar Darya Mein Dal is gone. So, which is why, because we are living in the internet age, keep putting out statistics and stories, fact based stories, with full evidence as to the sort of sustainable development which India has created in the neighborhood, as opposed to the PRC. That has to be done. Also has to be done because this neighborhood of India, and India and our neighborhood has young populaces, which mostly gets its data from the internet or social media and so on. So why not act in accordance with what actually is the reality? First is that. Second, convey India's red lines in a much more stricter way, because somehow some of our neighbors do not, cross the red lines of the PRC, but they always tend to do when it comes to India. I think a little bit more of tweaks and continued following of what we have always done is the right way forward.
Thank you so much for the nuanced understanding. I think you're the first person that I'm hearing the Neki Kar Darya Mein Dal perspective from. We usually don't cite that, and this is a very refreshing take. In the paucity of time, I would like to conclude with one quick question to you, that in your experience in the government as well as in think tanks and private universities, uh, in your experience and understanding of the Chinese state, what do you think is the single biggest misconception that Indian policymakers, media, and the public have about China today, especially in India?
Thank you for this and wonderful concluding question. Very quickly, a widespread misconception among sections of Indian policymakers, media, and the public is that the Chinese state is a monolithic, infallible strategic actor with unlimited resources. The reality is its economy faces structural challenges, including high local debt, high local government debt, exceeding 300% of its GDP, and a property sector crisis which persists in 2026. Second, India's strategic community overestimates China's internal cohesion, underappreciating how its demographic decline, with its working age population shrinking by over 5 million annually, constrains Beijing's long term power projection. compared to India's demographic dividend. Many in India perceive China as an unbeatable export and manufacturing juggernaut. Yet, India's successful PLI has attracted over $100 billion in electronics manufacturing investment since 2020. It's enabled Indian exports in mobile phones. The focus is never on what India has done. It's constantly hyping up that, oh, China has made great strides and creating the pressure on India, irrespective of whatever India has done. Fourthly, Indian public discourse views China as it views the Chinese state as pragmatically non-expansionist if engaged economically, ignoring documented facts of its salami slicing tactics along the LAC, including its illiberal economics against India, and so on. A key misconception is treating China's BRI as purely developmental, while data actually shows debt distress in several Indian Ocean countries. And the last point, policymakers and media in India occasionally overestimate the CCP's adaptability, underplaying how its centralized control has led to policy missteps, such as the zero COVID lockdown, which caused an estimated 3% permanent GDP loss, and accelerated global supply chain diversification, which favor India and Vietnam, to be fair. So, unless these misconceptions go, and worshipping the PRC as infallible goes away, a correct assessment cannot really happen. So it's not just the government alone. I would attribute more of it to the policy circuits that we live in and to the media. So that's where we are. But hopefully things will change.
Thank you so much for that. I truly believe that a conversation with you every time is a reminder of the significance of pushing out the correct narrative, which are grounded in realities and facts, and also of the significance of becoming informed optimists rather than just, being idealistic about the situations around us. Like you rightly pointed out, that we choose to ignore that China's expansionist tendencies, something that should be kept in mind as we move forward. But at the same time, I do believe that this reflects in the policies of the government now, and it also needs to come down at the level of awareness for individuals. And with that note, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope the viewers have a lot of take back from today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farina, and thank you, Global Order.
Thank you.